Steve stays on. Let's quickly open this up. Suhel Seth needs no introduction. Alistair Rosenshine, Air Marshal V.K. Bhatia, Abha Singh, Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Suhel, from last evening to now, what has changed?
Nothing, except that media channels are now creating, some media channels are now creating kangaroo courts, which have kind of whittled down. We have stopped the accusatory mode of questioning. Media has recognized that not every media anchor, not every person on a panel is an expert, and that we need to let, as Steve said, we need to let the investigation take its own course. Everything, Pranesh, everything you and I and the rest of the panel say is all hypothetical, non-contextual, unresearched, and non-investigated. You know, there were some idiots on another panel who kept saying, oh, but you know, the food was a bit flawed in December 2024. Oh, but this was not right. You know, the problem in India is we are very good with hindsight and very poor with foresight. The reality is there's an investigation that has been ordered. This is not an issue of a plane crash alone. There are three principal stakeholders in these kind of investigations. And I hate to say this, I've sat on the Global Advisory Board of British Airways. So it's not that I'm talking from a point of absolute ignorance. But as I said, I'm no expert. The stakeholders are Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, the airline, and the regulator. Until the investigation is complete, and you yourself said the black box has been recovered, until the investigation is complete, every guy is an expert. Oh, I think this happened, I think this happened. You know, thought didn't do anything. The point is, are we actually working towards some level of accountability? AP. To me, yesterday, that an entire nation was grieving and an entire nation was coming to terms with this tragedy. It has created an issue, and a lot of the channels, and I hate to say this, Pranesh, a lot of channels were creating the kind of fear that would have moved people away from flying. You have one captain, you have one air marshal, and I will say this in front of them, flying is actually the safest form of travel. You have Abhijit, who's a strategy and a defense expert. You know, the reason why an accident is called an accident is because it is an accident. No one plans to, oh, I'm going to fly today and create an accident unless you were one of those 9/11 jokers. So let's cut people some slack. There are crew members, there are pilots of not only Air India, but other airlines across the world who are working every day. You cannot inject the fear of God into passengers, into crew, into engineers. You know, the worst thing will be if you make people doubt their own integrity, their competence, and their affection for the brand that they serve. So my view would be, give it time. On the one hand, the families need to heal. The families need to come to terms with this ghastly, horrific tragedy. And on the other, we need to establish a process which delivers two things, accountability and a solution going forward. Until then, everything is hypothetical and everything is just, you know, straws in the wind.
Which is why we're having this informed discussion. You know, this is not some pedestrian commentary. I agree with everything you've said, except that, you know, you said there are three stakeholders. I would want to add a fourth one, which is the people, the passengers, people like you, regular flyers. And safety is at the heart of everything we are discussing. I want to bring in Mr. Rosenshine. Mr. Rosenshine, you've heard Captain Steve, you've heard Suhel Seth. What is your view of what you've seen so far?
Well, first of all, I want to say that Captain Steve spoke a lot of sense. A lot of what he said is what I was going to say. You know, we're talking here about whether we should speculate or not speculate. But you get two pilots in a room anywhere in the world, and they will be speculating. No different in that respect. So what we saw in this accident is the aircraft did a normal takeoff. And as Captain Steve quite rightly said, it's not possible to take off with the flaps raised. That is not in the takeoff configuration, because you get a takeoff configuration warning horn, a very loud horn on the flight deck. And as a result, you'll immediately reject the takeoff, and you'll hardly be moving at that point because the horn will come on as soon as the throttles are moved into the takeoff position. So we must assume the aircraft did start its takeoff roll with the flaps down in the takeoff position. And then goes through the V1 speed and then the rotate speed. At the rotate speed, the pilot will pull the nose of the aircraft up. And as soon as it starts to climb and we get a vertical speed indicator showing that the aircraft is climbing, the handling pilot will call for the gear to be raised. But the gear wasn't raised. And so it is my contention that it is really possible that at that point the flaps were raised in error. We have to bear in mind that there were difference in experience between the two pilots. The captain had some 8,000 hours. The first officer was relatively new. He only had 1,000 hours. So it is possible. Humans make mistakes, and it's very easy to make a mistake. And usually you've got time to correct the mistake, or the other pilot has time to correct it. But in this instance, raising the flaps at that point in the flight will produce the flight path that we see in the video, which is the aircraft getting to a certain height through inertia and because it's got full power, but then losing lift because you change the shape of the wing. It is now not producing the right amount of lift, and that will cause the aircraft to descend. And the aircraft is descending in the right attitude, meaning that the handling pilot is holding the aircraft in the right attitude with the nose up at maybe 15, 20 degrees and the wings more or less level. But as the aircraft descends, you can clearly see in the video that the aircraft is wallowing a little bit. The wings are sort of rolling a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. It's almost imperceptible, but that is an indication of an aircraft that is approaching the stall, and in it went. Now, of course, as your columnist said, it is very important to wait for the results of an investigation through the black boxes. There are many people involved here, and their relatives and friends, and they want to know the truth. And more than that, aviation as a whole needs to know the truth. We have to know whether this accident was aircraft type specific. In other words, was this something which could only happen to a 787, the Dreamliner, or was it something that could happen to any aircraft? And my contention at this point is that the investigators will indeed be looking at the human error aspect of this.